Hello, my name is Lisa Hoover, and I am one of the librarians here at Clarkson. And today I just want to talk to you a little bit about plagiarism, citation, and paraphrasing in your writing. I know this isn't the most exciting or most interesting topic in the world, but it is really important because plagiarizing is kind of a surefire way to get yourself into trouble and to potentially derail your academic career. So it's something that we definitely want to make sure upfront you know how to avoid and you know how to recognize and you know what to do to make sure you're doing things correctly. So we want to address it before it becomes a problem. My contact information is right here in the middle. You can get me at lhoover@clarkson.edu, or you can schedule an actual meeting with me at thecalendly.com/Lisa Hoover. That'll take you right to my calendar, and you can set up an actual one-on-one meeting either by Zoom or face-to-face to sit down and talk about whatever challenges you're having, whether that's how to cite or how to find something, or whether you're concerned about whether you're citing enough or those sorts of things. That's a great way to have that conversation. So I want to start just briefly by talking a little bit about why we make you cite. I think often it gets kind of the purpose of citing gets kind of lost, and we focus on citing as just one of those things that we have to do, and one of those things that is just like a drag and it's a requirement, and it's something that we don't really think about having any actual purpose beyond kind of making our lives miserable. Or maybe that was just me because I was not a big fan of citations when I was a student. But really there's a lot of important reasons that we ask students to cite. And a lot of them really come back to the idea as of scholarship as conversation, or citations as conversation, right? And the idea is that when you have different papers or different research projects or whatever it is that you're citing, ultimately they're all pieces in one conversation about your topic, right? So everybody that has written an academic journal article, they're all contributing to our overall understanding of your topic. And basically what you're doing when you're citing is you're pointing people to particular pieces of that conversation. So you're telling them where they can get more information. You're telling them who contributed. You're giving them everything that they need to know to see the whole picture and all the pieces of the conversation, kind of as I'm representing it here with this image, right? You can think of each of these people as a scholarly journal article, and you can see how they're all connected together, and how it's important for your reader now as you are adding yourself to the conversation to understand where your information came from and which pieces of the conversation you're picking up and who they came from, right? You want your reader to understand where your contribution to the conversation fits into the overall picture. And that's how the citations work for you, right? And not only do they give credit to the original author and point your user back to more information, but they really strengthen your argument, right? They show your reader that you're not just standing here by yourself making this argument, you're part of a bigger community and part of a bigger picture of support for that argument, right? You're showing your reader that there's all of these people that agree with you, or that have done studies or have collected information that supports the foundation of what you're saying, right? So it shows how your argument is really founded in a much bigger picture, and that it's not just you out there with your own opinion, okay? And basically, here's another way to think about it, right? This idea of the conversation. You have a scholarly article that talks about, this one really cool study on your topic. And then you have a scholarly article that takes kind of a different perspective or adds another dimension to our understanding. And you read those two and you see them together and you come up with hopefully a new idea and a new contribution, right? By what you've read and what you've studied through the existing literature, you are contributing new ideas and new perspectives and making new connections between that material, okay? So that's really what your paper is your combination, your demonstration of your learning and your connections from the other scholarly materials that you've read, or whatever it is that you're citing, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be scholarly stuff. It might be things like newspaper articles or TED Talks or other sources of information. But either way, you're pulling that together and you're adding your perspective and your ideas. And your citations, again, are the way that your reader understands where you got the information from and where your initial ideas and perspectives came from, okay? And ultimately, practical purposes, even if you don't care about all of those things, I'm guessing you care about your academic reputation and about your standing here at Clarkson. And students have definitely gotten in trouble in the past, in some cases in significant trouble for plagiarism. And I have links out here, and I'll send these slides along to Professor Ettinger so she can share them with you. But there are just a couple examples here that I thought I would pull out of students getting in trouble for plagiarism. One was from a couple of years ago when there was a quote unquote outbreak of plagiarism at Harvard, where 125 different students got in trouble for this. And this was regarding plagiarism on a test. And then we have this example where a couple of students were actually kicked out of a semester at C program because they had allegedly plagiarized. And in that case, it was really about a very small amount of plagiarism, one might argue. 3 sentence fragments that she had taken from Wikipedia and a movie synopsis that she had paraphrased without citing, okay? So not a lot is required for you to potentially get in trouble for plagiarism, right? And that's really why it's really important that you make sure that you are following proper protocols and that you are citing correctly, because we don't want that to happen to you. Okay. And I find that students tend to be familiar with the broad idea of plagiarism, right? Copying or stealing somebody's ideas and using them as your own. But there are really a lot of different ways that you can engage in plagiarism. And I think sometimes students don't quite realize that some of these things count as plagiarism. The most obvious one, the one that I think most of us are thinking of when we say plagiarism or we hear the word plagiarism, is this kind of direct plagiarism where a student copies the work of another author verbatim without citing, right? Like that cut and paste kind of plagiarism, where I literally take a paragraph out of Wikipedia and drop it in my paper and I don't cite where it came from. Self-plagiarism is one that I find often surprises students, so it's definitely one that I like to highlight. And this you could think of as kind of recycling your material or your work from one course or one paper or project to another without citing yourself. And this is dishonest because you're reusing your work basically without letting your professor know that that's what you're doing. But you're also missing the chance to cite your own work and give yourself credit for past work, right? And then mosaic plagiarism is where students kind of cherry pick words and phrases or change words here and there without acknowledging the source. And this is actually something I see a fair amount. I've actually seen students take whole sentences or whole paragraphs and run them through a thesaurus and think because the wording is different, that actually means that they're not plagiarizing, and that's not the case. Just because you've changed the wording doesn't mean that you're not plagiarizing and you don't need to cite. You still need to cite even if you've changed the wording. Anytime you use a source or information from a source, it has to be cited. And then another really important one that I like to talk about is accidental plagiarism, because I suspect this is often something that trips students up. It's not, malicious or trying to cheat or use somebody else's work. But just making some sort of a mistake, either not realizing that you need to cite something or just forgetting to add your citation or not keeping track of where your information comes from or those sorts of things. And you can still get in trouble for plagiarism for that, right? If your professor catches that work or that information came from somewhere and you didn't cite it, even if it was a mistake or like an oversight on your point or on your part, you can still face consequences for that. So the reason I like to bring this up is because that's one where you can really make a difference by being careful, right? That's keeping careful track of your notes, keeping careful track of your citation information, being really clear both in your own notes as you're working on your paper, but also in the paper itself to your reader about what is your ideas and what is your thoughts versus what is ideas and thoughts and words from a source, right? Really important stuff, okay? And so that really brings me to one of the main points that I want to make is it doesn't matter what your process is, right? Some people, handwrite things out in a notebook. Some people literally print out all of the things they're going to read and cite and take notes that way. Some people use a program like Zotero, which I'll talk about toward the end here. Whatever your method is that you use to process and take notes on your sources, make sure you're being careful about it, okay? Make sure you have all the information that you're going to need to cite And make sure you're being very clear about what information came from which source, right? You don't want to write down the wrong source information or leave source information out, because then you run into that potential problem of accidental plagiarism that we were talking about a minute ago. Okay. So some tips for protecting against plagiarism. Ask yourself, did I know this information without having to look it up? If you had to look it up, you need to cite it, okay? Are there any data or images that you didn't produce? So if this is something that I see a lot, students pull, images off the internet and they don't really think that they need to cite them. And that's not accurate. Unless you took that image yourself, you have to cite where that image came from, okay? And the same thing with data, okay? If you pull a graph, from somewhere, or you use data from a source and create your own graph, that needs to be cited, right? And is this an idea that's not my own? Okay, again, even if you reword it, if the underlying idea or underlying information came from somebody else, you have to cite, okay? Some tips: cite whenever you use an exact quote, and make sure you use quotation marks. Definitely should be clear to your reader if you are using somebody else's exact words, okay? But even if you're not using an exact quotation, make sure you cite periodically if you're paraphrasing, okay? And my rule of thumb is kind of at the end of every paragraph, or when I switch to using a new source. But just in general, make sure it's clear if you're using somebody else's ideas. Take detailed notes. We've already kind of talked about that. Keep track of the citation information from your sources. Keep your thoughts clearly separated from the experts, or make sure you're being clear to your reader about what's other experts' ideas and information versus your own. And when in doubt, if you are not sure, ask somebody. Ask your professor, ask a librarian, ask me. If you don't know if you need to cite it, just ask, okay? And if for some reason you can't ask or you're still not sure, cite it, right? I like to say I don't think seen somebody get in trouble for like oversighting. It's the not citing that you get in trouble for. So if you're not sure, just cite it to be safe, okay? But the other thing that I like to talk about is how to actually use your sources. I find that this is something that a lot of students struggle with. They don't know how to naturally integrate their sources into their paper, and they sometimes will fall into like the habit of just being like, this source says this source says that, this source says this, right? And it can become very stilted and it doesn't read naturally. And it's not the most effective use of your sources. So I like to also discuss this a little bit. And one thing I also see is struggling with paraphrasing, right? Paraphrasing isn't just like ordering the words or changing the words slightly, like we have here with our little cartoon, where one person says cuteness is present abundantly in kittens, and somebody else says, she says kittens are cute, right? And I see this a lot where students like literally will just reorder the words or rephrase it in a way that sometimes actually ends up reading really awkwardly and just sounding super unnatural. And you can tell that somebody's trying to paraphrase, right? That's not what you want, okay? You want to make sure that it still reads smoothly, right? And again, even if you're paraphrasing, you still need to cite your sources. So regardless of whether you reworded it, you would still need to cite here. So our friend in blue would need to cite where he got that information from, right? But so how do I use my sources? How do I incorporate them? I really like this 8 strategies by a guy called Mark Gaipa. He first of all, I think, has some really great ways to explain the use of sources, but he also has these really fun cartoons or graphics that I think help kind of illustrate what he's talking about. So I'm going to run through his 8 strategies and kind of use them as a springboard for ways you can use your sources in your paper, right? And the first one, he says you can use your sources to kind of pick a fight, right? You could take your source and you can knock down that scholar's argument and hopefully replace it with your own argument supported by evidence, right? So you can, if, for example, I have a sentence example here, Bob Smith argues, citation. However, more recent evidence indicates citation, right? So I'm taking Bob Smith's article that I read and I'm kind of knocking it down by using other articles that I read to show how his information is, out of date or out of touch or is not complete, right? Here's another one. He calls this riding a scholar's coattails, right? This is where you're kind of piggybacking on somebody else's reputation and using their reputation and their knowledge to further your own argument, right? So you're agreeing with a scholar in this case and using their evidence and authority, or defending a scholar from attack by another scholar to resolve a larger controversy, right? So for example, while Susie Adams argues, other scholars such as Amy Jones have refuted this. However, a close look at the literature shows, and then you marshal your evidence to show that Susie Adams is actually correct, right? And here again, kind of similar is this idea of piggybacking, AKA standing on the shoulders of a giant. And then we can see in our little cartoon, I can see so much further from up here, right? So this is standing on top of a mountain of evidence that supports what you're saying. Okay, so again, agree with a scholar, but then complete or extend the scholar's work, usually by borrowing an idea or a concept and developing it through application to a new subject or a new part of the conversation, right? So this is going beyond what the original author has said. You're taking their idea and you're piggybacking on it from your new perspective, right? So for example, Laura Young made a groundbreaking discovery when she observed that, citation, with further research, citation, we can expand on her observation by, and then put in your new perspective or your new idea, okay? And then we've got leapfrogging, again, kind of a similar idea, but he also calls this biting the hand that feeds you. So again, we're starting with an agreement and then completing or extending the scholar's work, but we're also, in this case, identifying and solving a problem with the work, like an oversight, an inconsistency, or a contradiction in the information, okay? So for example, Lee Marshall argues persuasively that, citation. However, this overlooks the fact, then citation or your own observation or idea, right? So you're showing what he missed in his argument, okay? Playing peacemaker, okay, is his fifth strategy. Identify a conflict or a dispute between two or more scholars and then resolve it using a new or more encompassing perspective. Okay, so for my example here, Sue argues the dinosaur extinction was caused by citation, but other scholars argue it was caused by citation. However, new evidence, again, citation, indicates that both have occurred simultaneously, indicating that. Okay, so I'm trying to take these kind of competing perspectives and argue that they're not really competing after all. We can put them together to get kind of a bigger, more all-encompassing perspective. Okay. And then here we go out to kind of more of the fringe perspective, right? He calls this idea taking on the establishment or acting paranoid, right? This is kind of where you're just disagreeing with everybody, right? And he says, you know, pick a fight with everybody in a critical conversation. Show how the status quo is wrong, critical consensus is unfounded, or a dispute is based on faulty assumptions. Okay, so this is where you've looked at the literature and you just think all of it's wrong, right? You think you see something that nobody else has seen yet. Okay, so for example, it's widely assumed that, citation. However, I believe this overlooks important evidence such as citation or evidence. Okay, so you still need evidence for your argument, right? You can't just argue that everybody's wrong and leave it at that, but you're using that evidence or those citations to undermine other sources or other citations, okay? And then similarly, we have dropping out. He also calls this finding room on the margins. So this is focusing on an issue in the margins of the conversation, illuminating that issue and ideally redefining the conversation. Okay, so this is kind of saying, you know, everybody's talking about this, but they're really missing the point, right? That's not the main problem, right? That's just a symptom of the problem. The real problem is this other thing over here, and that's what we should be talking about, okay? And that's kind of what he's arguing for here, right? So for example, so much scholarship in this area has focused on citation. However, I believe this overlooks citation or evidence, right? Again, redirecting the conversation to an area that you think has been overlooked or under discussed, okay? And then there's kind of my favorite, which is the crossbreeding. This is where you inject really new material into the conversation or produce a new argument or perspective, maybe through using another discipline or bringing in new evidence or framework. And I like this because I like the cross-disciplinary approach, right? The idea that there may be people outside of my discipline or outside my area of expertise that have useful things to say that I can add to the existing perspective, right? So for example, traditionally, this problem's been approached purely as a problem of engineering, citations, However, if we consider the problem through a historical lens, we'll see that non-engineering related problems contribute, and therefore new solutions might be needed, citations or evidence or whatever the case might be, right? So pulling in perspectives from other experts in other fields that may totally change the way that we look at this issue, okay? So those are kind of the ways he argues you can use a source, right? And as you can see from the examples I've used, often you can naturally integrate these into your argument, right? Without having to even explicitly, reference the source, right? You can use your citations to show the reader that you're getting this information from a source, okay? And I just want to finish by calling out Zotero, but also just reiterating that we're here to help you with your citations. So whether you're doing your citations kind of the old-fashioned by hand way, or you're using a citation management system like Zotero, we are here to help you, and we do offer support for Zotero. So if you try to use Zotero and you're having trouble, definitely come and see me or send me an email, okay? If you're not familiar with Zotero, it is a free tool, a free software that helps you collect, organize, cite, and share your research. And there are other options out there like Mendeley, but I typically just focus on Zotero. They're all kind of similar. But basically, Zotero helps you save your citation information and track your sources. So it'll actually save the PDFs of your journal articles, for example. But the big important purpose for citation purposes is it keeps track of all that citation information, like the author and title and page numbers and all of that for you, okay? It allows you to organize your sources, so you can create folders and put your different articles and things like that into your folders to kind of organize your thoughts and organize your research. But ultimately, probably the piece that you'll be the most excited about is that it allows you to create in text citations and reference lists in either Google Docs or Microsoft Word, okay? And basically, you'll go to Zotero.org, you'll download your Zotero library and your Zotero plugin for your browser, and you'll start adding your sources to it. And what it does is it also adds a tab to Google Docs or Microsoft Word. And if for some reason you install and you don't get that tab, again, we offer support. So like come and talk to me or send me an email. But basically using that tab, you can then have it literally create your in-text and reference list citations for you. I always add the caveat, you still need to proofread them, right? It's not foolproof. It can still make mistakes, but it saves a lot of the time of like actually typing out those citations, okay? I will be offering a workshop later in the semester that will focus on Zotero, and I can give that information to Professor Ettinger as well, so she has that, so she can share that with you. So if you have interest in Zotero, you can come to that workshop, but you can also set up a one-on-one meeting with me or send me an email if you have questions about that. Okay, and then let me really quickly, since I didn't add a closing slide, pop back to the beginning. And again, here's my contact information. So if you have questions, concerns, problems, you need assistance with any of this stuff, send me an email, set up an appointment, and I'm happy to sit down and work with you one-on-one. But I hope you'll feel a little more confident going forward on knowing exactly when you need to cite and exactly how to use those citations to make for the most effective paper you can. All right, I look forward to working with you guys. Again, contact me anytime, not just for this class, but for any of your classes.